Daily Learning.
He's a boy I know. He's a boy I know. The quiet kind, the one who speaks less but feels deeply, whose world is a little softer, a little quieter, when he's holding a book. Not to impress you with how many stories he's read, or to paint him as some kind of extraordinary soul, but simply because there's a gentle truth in the way he lives, and that quiet truth is something worth sharing. This is the story of that boy. A boy who found peace, purpose, and pieces of himself between the pages. He's not the type to talk much about himself, but if you've ever watched him with a novel in his hands, you'd know that something magical happens when he reads. You'd see the way his eyes soften, the way he forgets to blink, the way the noise of everything else disappears. Ever since he was a little boy, Daniel had always been captivated by the quiet beauty of books, though he never really understood why it was easier to sit still with a book than with people, and perhaps that was the very beginning of it all. It wasn't just about reading for him, it was about disappearing into another world, one carefully crafted by someone he had never met, yet felt deeply connected to through every word and every line that danced before his eyes. As he grew older and the world became louder, faster, and far more demanding, Daniel found comfort in turning to novels, his own personal sanctuary, a retreat where no one could interrupt his thoughts. He had read so many different genres over the years that he sometimes lost track of how many lives he had lived through the pages of those books. He had been a detective chasing down serial killers in the dark alleys of fictional cities, a heartbroken lover in a rainy French village, a courageous knight in faraway kingdoms where dragons still roamed, and even a time traveler who drifted between centuries with nothing but a journal and a sense of loss. Although he explored stories from every corner of imagination, there was something about coming-of-age novels that always tugged at his soul the most, especially the ones where the main character was struggling to understand who they were or where they belonged. Those stories often mirrored his own quiet introspection, and as he read them, he felt less alone in the world. There was a novel he had read when he was 16. It's a quiet, haunting tale about a boy who had lost his father and went on a long walk across the country to scatter his ashes. That novel didn't have dramatic twists or cinematic heroism, but its gentleness, its raw honesty, and its emotional clarity had changed something in Daniel. It was the story that had turned reading from a casual habit into a lifelong passion. Since then, reading became more than just a hobby. It was an emotional lifeline, especially during the moments when life felt like too much or not enough. During long train rides when the world outside blurred into a silent movie, during sleepless nights when anxiety clung to his chest like a heavy coat, or during quiet afternoons when the sun spilled through the window and everything felt a little too still, he would reach for a book, and suddenly, the air felt lighter. Reading didn't solve his problems, but it gave him the space to breathe through them. In time, Daniel realized that reading expanded more than just his imagination. It reshaped his worldview. Through novels, he learned about injustice in faraway lands, the emotional weight of historical trauma, the quiet resilience of marginalized voices, and the beauty of cultures he had never encountered in his daily life. There was a story about a woman who fled war carrying only her memories and her child, and another about a teenage boy growing up in poverty, dreaming of becoming an artist despite everything that told him he couldn't. These stories weren't just fiction. They were windows into truths he might never have seen otherwise. Slowly, the more he read, the more he felt connected to the world, even if he often felt like an outsider in it. Moreover, reading had this strange way of revealing parts of himself he didn't know how to name. There were days when he felt confused about his purpose, about why he felt empty even when life seemed fine on the surface. But then he would stumble across a passage where a character asked the very question he had been silently carrying in his chest, and suddenly, it was like someone had turned on a light inside him. Reading validated his emotions. It told him it was okay to not have it all figured out, that questioning things was part of being human. Often, after finishing a novel, Daniel would sit in silence for a while, just holding the book in his hands, staring into the space beyond the last sentence. It was a sacred kind of stillness, not empty, but full, with reflection, gratitude, and a quiet ache that came from letting go of characters he had grown to love. He believed that every book left a subtle fingerprint on his soul, shaping him in ways he might never fully understand. He had shelves full of stories, not just for the sake of collecting them, but because each one had marked a different version of himself. Even when life got busy and days blurred into routines, Daniel made time to read. Not out of obligation, but out of necessity. It was his way of reconnecting with himself, especially when the world demanded so much noise. Sometimes, people asked him why he read so much, and he'd smile softly, never quite knowing how to explain that reading was how he survived the chaos, how he processed grief, how he dreamed of things bigger than himself. Even when life got busy and days blurred into routines, Daniel made time to read, not out of obligation, but out of necessity. It was his way of reconnecting with himself, especially when the world demanded so much noise. Sometimes, people asked him why he read so much, and he'd smile softly, never quite knowing how to explain that reading was how he survived the chaos, how he processed grief, how he dreamed of things bigger than himself. And although he had friends, colleagues, and people who cared about him, there were parts of him that only books understood. Parts that felt too tender, too complex, or too abstract to be voiced aloud. When he read, he could be vulnerable without fear, curious without boundaries, hopeful without shame. He had read love stories that mended pieces of him he didn't realize were broken, psychological thrillers that reminded him of the fragility of perception, science fiction tales that stretched his thoughts beyond the sky, and philosophical novels that whispered questions into his heart late into the night. Each genre had its role, its moment when it became exactly what he needed. Most of all, reading gave Daniel peace. It wasn't always a loud joy, but rather a quiet, steady kind, the kind that wrapped around him like a warm blanket on a cold evening. It grounded him when his mind wandered too far, calmed him when emotions threatened to overflow, and brought clarity when problems tangled themselves into knots. It wasn't that he found answers in books, but that books helped him ask better questions. Whenever he found himself stuck in the same thoughts, unsure about a decision, weighed down by guilt, or just worn out from being strong too long, he would lose himself in a book, and without even realizing it, find a path back to himself. Some stories didn't offer solutions, but they gave him metaphors and characters that helped him see things differently. And sometimes, that shift in perspective was all he needed to move forward. His favorite time to read was just after midnight, when the world around him quieted and he could hear his thoughts clearly, without interruption. There was something magical about the darkness, how it heightened his focus, how it made the story feel more intimate. Under the dim light of his bedside lamp, with only the soft hum of the city in the distance, he would turn each page like he was unwrapping a secret. The solitude didn't make him lonely. It made him whole. Though Daniel had dreams of traveling, meeting new people, and experiencing life in its full color, He knew that books had already given him 1,000 lives and 1,000 paths. They didn't replace real-life experience, but they enriched it. Because of books, he noticed the little things, how the sky shifted in color when the sun rose, how a stranger's smile could carry a story, how silence often spoke louder than words. He loved the way novels could carry both pain and hope in the same sentence, how a single chapter could feel like therapy, and how an ending, even a tragic one, could leave him feeling strangely healed. Every book he read left echoes in his mind, echoes that sometimes returned when he least expected them. A phrase, a moment, a character's bravery, they lingered like old friends. And while Daniel knew that he would never have enough time to read every book ever written, he also knew that wasn't the point. Reading wasn't about finishing, it was about experiencing, about immersing, about connecting. The act of reading itself was what mattered. So he kept reading, not to escape life, but to understand it better. Not to run away from problems, but to see them with softer eyes. Not to replace reality, but to enhance it. And in every story he read, he found a little piece of himself, waiting to be discovered. Because in the end, Daniel didn't just love stories. He lived through them, healed through them, grew through them. And as long as there were stories to be told, he knew he would never truly be alone. Maybe he'll never write a book of his own. Maybe his story will never be told in grand chapters or echoed across generations. But somehow, through every story he reads, he's already leaving something behind. Not in fame, not in recognition, but in the quiet way he chooses to understand instead of judge, to imagine instead of ignore, and to feel deeply even when no one's watching. That's what reading gave him, a heart that listens before it speaks, and a mind that keeps asking questions even when there are no answers. And perhaps, in the end, that's the kind of life that matters most. Not the loudest one, but the one shaped by stories, tender, thoughtful, and wide open to the world.